Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened Quincy God power and fell in love with Bambietta Basterbine? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Silent King. The silence was a different kind of weapon. It wasn't the roaring hatred he had known as a child, the screamed curses and thrown stones that had at least been honest in their fury. This was a newer, colder poison that had seeped into the bones of Konoha over the past few years. It was the silence of averted eyes, of conversations that died the moment he rounded a corner, of doors that quietly clicked shut as he passed. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket woven from fear and distrust, and it was draped over his shoulders every moment he walked the village streets. Naruto Uzumaki felt it now, a tangible pressure against his senses as he walked down the main thoroughfare. The midday sun was warm on his skin, but the air around him was frigid. A mother, haggling with a fruit vendor, caught his eye. Her smile vanished. In one smooth motion, she dropped a few extra coins on the counter, grabbed her child's hand, and pulled him away, her back ramrod straight. The child looked over his shoulder, his expression not of hate, but of pure, unadulterated curiosity, a look that was swiftly corrected by a sharp tug from his mother. The vendor, a man whose stall Naruto had passed 1,000 times, suddenly became intensely interested in arranging his apples into a perfect pyramid, his face a mask of deliberate ignorance. This was his life. Not a pariah, not anymore. A pariah was cast out. He was something worse. An asset in a cage, a weapon to be kept polished but isolated, a Jinchuriki whose leash was held by a village that both needed and resented his existence. Pathetic. A voice like grinding gravel and ancient magma rumbled in the back of his mind. It was a constant companion, the only one he couldn't escape. Their fear is a weakness. Take it, burn it away, let them see a real monster, and they will know true silence. Naruto's jaw tightened, a barely perceptible tick. And become the very thing they accuse me of being. No. His mental reply was firm, worn smooth b. Why 1,000 repetitions of the same argument? I walk my own path. Your path leads to this empty street, boy. My path leads to their ashes. One of us is more practical. He ignored the Kyuubi, his focus drawn to the window of a small bakery. The smell of fresh bread was a small, warm anchor in the cold sea of his reality. He hadn't eaten since morning. His stomach grumbled in quiet protest. Pushing down a spike of apprehension, he pushed the door open. A small bell chimed, a cheerful, incongruous sound. The woman behind the counter was new, he thought. She had a kind face, wrinkles crinkling around her eyes as she looked up from wiping the counter. Welcome. What can I get for you today? For a heart-stopping second, Naruto felt a flicker of hope. A normal interaction. A simple, human transaction. He managed a small, hesitant smile. Just a loaf of that rye bread, please. He pointed to the dark, hearty loaf on the shelf. The woman's eyes followed his finger, and then, inevitably, they drifted to his face. To the 3 distinct whisker-like marks on each cheek. Recognition dawned, and then came the change. It was a subtle thing, a tightening around her mouth, a dimming of the light in her eyes. The professional warmth became a brittle shell. I'm sorry, she said, her voice a few degrees cooler. That one's reserved. Naruto's gaze swept the bakery. It was empty. The shelf was laden with dozens of identical loaves. The lie was so blatant, so unnecessary, it was almost comical. The hope inside him died, as it always did. Right, reserved. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just nodded once, the motion tight and controlled, and turned to leave. The little bell chimed his exit, a mocking punctuation mark on his failure. Back on the street, the pressure was worse. He feel the woman's relief radiating from the bakery, a sharp spike of spiritual static joining the suffocating hum of the rest of the village. It wasn't just his imagination anymore. For the past few months, he had started to feel it. The emotions of others, particularly when directed at him, had taken on a texture, a weight. It was a low-frequency thrum at the base of his skull, a constant reminder of his isolation. He walked away from the bustling center of the village, his steps leading him towards the drab, forgotten outskirts where his apartment complex stood. The building was a monument to mediocrity. A concrete block that housed the transient and the unimportant. It suited him perfectly. His apartment was as he had left it. Sterile, sparse, more of a holding cell than a home. A single bed, a small table with one chair. A kitchenette that saw little use. The only personal touch was the stack of books on advanced chakra theory and sealing techniques on the floor, their spines cracked from use. He had long ago realized that if he wanted to be more than the Kyuubi's jailer, he would have to learn on his own. The academy had taught him the basics, his own desperate need for survival had taught him the rest. He dropped onto the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning in protest. The silence in the room was absolute, a stark contrast to the thrumming pressure of the village's call. Active animosity that still echoed in his head. Here, alone, the pressure receded, but the emptiness rushed in to take its place. This is what you choose, Kurama rumbled, a note of grim satisfaction in his tone. Solitude. Starvation. For what? The approval of insects who would crush you if they could. It's not about approval, Naruto whispered to the empty room, his voice hoarse. It's about not letting them win. Not letting them turn me into what they see. They've already won, Kit. You're alone. You're miserable. You are a king with the power of a god, begging for bread from peasants. Naruto closed his eyes, pressing the heels of his palms into them. The fox was right, in his own brutal way. The path he had chosen was lonely and hard, and the rewards were non-existent. He was strong, stronger than any of his peers. He knew, but it was a hidden strength. To the village, he was a risk. To his teammates, a loud-mouthed burden. Kakashi-sensei was distant, a ghost lost in his own past. Sasuke was consumed by a darkness that mirrored Naruto's own loneliness, but twisted it into a hunger for power. Sakura barely saw him at all. He lay there, adrift in the silence, and focused on the pressure he'd felt earlier. That thrumming, spiritual static. He let his senses expand, not with chakra, but with something else. Something deeper. It was an instinct he hadn't known he possessed until recently. He reached out with his mind, and he could feel it again, faint but present. The low-level hum of the village, the distant spike of a training ninja's chakra, the quiet, immense power the Hokage monument watching over everything. And then there was the other energy. It wasn't chakra, it was everywhere, in everything. In the air he breathed, in the wood of the floor, in the very motes dancing in the sliver of sunlight cutting through his window. It was a vast, silent ocean of particles, and chakra was just a noisy, chaotic ripple on its surface. He had no name for it, but he felt a strange kinship with it. It was quiet, precise, and powerful. He sat up, a thought forming in his mind. An experiment. He focused on the energy he felt from the village, that specific, direct animosity that had followed him home. It was a foul, clinging residue in his own spiritual space. He hated it, he wanted it gone, but instead of pushing it away, he did something different. He pulled, gently, tentatively, he drew on that negative energy. He expected it to be painful, corrosive. Instead, it was simply fuel. Cold, efficient fuel. The hostile static in his mind began to quiet as he absorbed it, and in its place, a new energy bloomed within his chest. It was cool, silver, and utterly, perfectly his. It wasn't the raging inferno of Kurama's chakra. It was the calm, collected focus of a master artisan. He held out his hand, palm up. The silver energy pooled there, visible to his eyes as a shimmering, ethereal light. It felt right, more right than chakra ever had. Chakra was a tool he had learned to use. This felt like a part of his own soul made manifest. What is this? Kurama's voice was laced with a new, unfamiliar note. Not contempt, but genuine confusion. This is not the sage's power. This is older. Naruto didn't answer. He was completely captivated. He thought of the bird he'd seen earlier, the one whose curious gaze had been cut short. He remembered its freedom, its effortless flight. He wanted that. He wanted a companion in the silence. He focused his will, not with the brute force of shaping chakra, but with a delicate touch. He imagined the energy in his palm as 1,000 shimmering threads of silver light. He wasn't molding it, he was weaving it. He mentally grasped a single thread, then another, looping them, twisting them, creating a framework. A tiny, Skeletal structure of light took shape above his palm. Then he began weaving the substance, thread by intricate thread, building feathers, a delicate beak, 2 tiny, intelligent eyes of condensed light. The process was instinctual, yet it required immense concentration. He felt the universe narrow down to the space above his hand, the dance of silver threads the only thing in existence. He built the bird from the inside out. Each feather a separate, perfect creation, each joint articulated. When he was finished, a perfect, silent bird made of pure, solid spiritual energy hovered above his hand. It was about the size of a sparrow, its form impossibly detailed, its silver body seeming to drink the light in the room. He felt a profound connection to it, as if it were a detached part of his own consciousness. With a thought, he commanded it to move. It blinked its tiny eyes, tilted its head, and then, with a flex of its woven wings, it took flight. It didn't flap with frantic energy, it simply rose, silent and graceful, and circled the drab apartment. It left no trail of light, made no sound. It was simply there, a shard of impossible beauty in a world of gray concrete. It pleated one circuit of the room before gliding down to land gently on his shoulder, its lightweight a comforting, solid presence. It nudged its head against his cheek, and he could feel the touch not just on his skin, but within his soul. A silent acknowledgement, a silent companionship, a small, genuine smile touched Naruto's lips for the first time that day. He wasn't entirely alone anymore. The summons came 2 days later. It was delivered by an Anbu in a blank porcelain mask, who appeared on his windowsill with the silent grace of a ghost. The message was simple and cold. Specialized training. Training ground 44-0600 tomorrow. Do not be late. The operative vanished before Naruto could ask a single question. Training ground 44. The Forest of Death. A place reserved for the most brutal phases of the Chunin exams. A place where genin died every year. Specialized training was a euphemism, and he knew it. This wasn't a reward for his progress. It was a test, a threat, a way to remind the Jinchuriki of his place. It's a trap, Kurama growled. They mean to break you. To push you until my power bursts forth, so they can justify the collar they wish to place around your neck. I know, Naruto said, stroking the silver bird perched on his finger. The bird, which he had silently named Jin, had not left his side. It required no food, no rest, only his passive will to sustain its form. It was his secret, his silent friend. But I'm not going to run, he continued. If they want to see what I can do, I'll show them. But it will be on my terms. The next morning, the air was cold and damp with pre-dawn mist as he arrived at the massive, gated entrance to the Forest of Death. 3 figures were waiting for him. He recognized one immediately. Ibiki Morino, the master of interrogation. His face a roadmap of old scars and grim satisfaction. The other 2 were Jonin he didn't know, but they carried the same air of hard-bitten authority. They looked at him not as a student, but as a problem to be solved. Uzumaki, you're punctual, Ibiki grunted, his voice like rocks grinding together. Good. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings, though I doubt you know much about that. Naruto remained silent, his expression calm. He had left Jin at his apartment, a silent sentinel. He didn't want to reveal that particular card just yet. The rules of this exercise are simple, Ibiki continued, gesturing towards the menacing forest. You will enter. You will survive for 72 hours. You are permitted to use any and all of your abilities. We, in turn, are permitted to use any and all of our resources to test your limits. Your objective is to reach the tower at the center of the forest. If you can do that, you pass. Any questions? It was a mockery of the Chunin exams. Stripped of all pretenses of fairness. This wasn't training, it was a hunt. No questions, Naruto said, his voice even. Ibiki's lip curled in something that might have been a smirk. Good. Begin. The massive gates groaned open, revealing a wall of dark, menacing foliage. Naruto took a deep breath, centered himself, and walked in without a backward glance. The moment he crossed the threshold, the gates slammed shut behind him with a deafening clang of finality. The forest was immediately oppressive. The canopy was so thick it plunged the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy, humid, and smelled of rot and damp earth. Strange calls of unseen creatures echoed through the trees. He was on high alert instantly, his senses, both his natural ones and the new, deeper spiritual sense, stretching out. He could feel them almost immediately. 4 chakra signatures, spreading out, flanking him. They weren't his proctors. They were Anbu, hidden, silent, and shadowing his every move. They were the real test. They're hurting you, Kurama noted. Driving you deeper in, away from the gate. Towards their chosen killing ground. Naruto didn't respond. He moved, his feet making barely a sound on the damp leaf litter. He was faster than most gave him credit for, his movements economical and precise. He leapt into the trees, blurring from branch to branch, putting distance between himself and the gate. He wasn't running from the hunters, he was choosing the battlefield. For hours, it was a tense game of cat and mouse. He used his knowledge of the terrain, gleaned from contraband scrolls. To his advantage, he laid rudimentary traps, used substitution jutsus to create false trails, and used shadow clones as decoys to test their reactions. His clones were dispelled with brutal efficiency, cut down by blades that appeared from the shadows or consumed by swift, silent earth-style jutsu. The Anbu were good, incredibly good. They moved like a single organism, their communication silent and flawless. They weren't trying to engage him directly, not yet. They were wearing him down, forcing him to expend chakra, pushing him towards a destination. He could feel their frustration growing, a sharp, angry static in the spiritual ocean around him. He was supposed to be a loud, predictable brat. He was supposed to charge headfirst into their traps. This calm, ceatical evasion was not what they had prepared for. Finally, they made their move. He was leaping across a small clearing when 4 shadow-clad figures dropped from the canopy, landing in a perfect square around him. Senbon needles, trailing thin, nearly invisible wires, shot from all directions, creating a cage. At the same time, the ground beneath him erupted, mud and roots coiling around his ankles, holding him fast. A trap, perfectly sprung. Jinchuriki, your little game is over, one of the Anbu said, his voice distorted by his mask. Lord Danzo's predictions were correct. Under pressure, you revert to evasive, cowardly tactics. Show us your true power. Show us the fox, Danzo. The name hung in the air, confirming all of Naruto's suspicions. This wasn't a village-sanctioned test. This was the dark, unofficial hand of Konoha's leadership reaching out to tighten his chain. I don't know any Danzo, Naruto said, his eyes darting between the 4 operatives, calculating angles, searching for a weakness. And the only coward I see is a man hiding behind a mask. The insult hit its mark. The lead ANBU's posture stiffened. Insolent brat. Perhaps a more direct approach is needed. He made a series of hand signs. Fire style. Great dragon fire technique. A massive, draconic head of roaring flame erupted from his mouth, hurtling towards the trapped Naruto. It was a jutsu designed to incinerate, to overwhelm. There was no way to dodge. Use it, Kit, Kurama roared. Use my power. Let me burn them all. No. Naruto's hands blurred through his own signs. Shadow clone jutsu. A dozen clones appeared around him. Without hesitation, they threw themselves in front of the fire dragon, creating a wall of flesh. They were consumed in an instant, their silent screams echoing in Naruto's mind as their experiences flooded back to him. The searing heat, the agony. But it bought him a precious second. As the dragon of flame washed over his position, he performed a substitution, his body's witching with a log he had prepared miles back. He appeared on a branch 100 meters away, breathing heavily, his clothes singed. The Anbu turned as one, their senses tracking his chakra signature. Impressive. But you're just delaying the inevitable. You're burning through chakra. How many more of those can you do? He was right. The constant use of clones and high-speed movement was taking its toll. His reserves were massive, but not infinite. They could do this all day. He needed to change the game. He formed a new sign, one he had practiced in secret 1,000 times. A forbidden jutsu, he'd copied from a scroll he definitely wasn't supposed to have. This is reckless, Kurama warned. You haven't perfected it. I don't need it to be perfect. I just need it to be a diversion. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. The forest exploded with orange. Not a dozen, but 200 Narutos appeared, flooding the clearing, the trees, the entire area. The Anbu were momentarily stunned by the sheer number. This was the opening he needed. While the clones charged, creating a chaotic, swirling melee, the real Naruto slipped away, moving low and fast. He didn't run. He circled, becoming the hunter. He found a vantage point high in a gnarled, ancient tree, its thick leaves providing perfect cover. He watched as the Anbu methodically, brutally, cut through his clones. They were a whirlwind of steel and elemental jutsu, each clone dispelled with a single, efficient strike. But they were separated now. Their perfect formation was broken. He focused on one, an operative who had moved to the edge of the chaos to deal with a group of clones trying to flank him. Naruto drew 3 kunai. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, he let that silver, spiritual energy flow into his arms, not to weave, but to guide. The world sharpened. He could see the path the kunai would take, a faint, shimmering line of probability. He threw. The kunai flew, not in a straight line, but in a curving arc, guided by his will and the subtle spin he put on them. The Anbu, busy dispatching a clone, sensed the attack at the last second. He twisted, dodging 2 of the kunai, but the third, the one Naruto had aimed no at him but at the branch he was standing on, struck true. The branch, weakened by the impact, cracked. The Anbu stumbled, his balance gone for a fraction of a second. It was all Naruto needed. He was already moving, dropping from his perch like a stone. He landed behind the off-balance operative, a kunai pressed to the man's throat. "Drop your weapon," Naruto said, his voice cold and low. The other 3 Anbu froze, their attention snapping to the hostage situation. The chaos of the clones died down as Naruto, his concentration now focused, allowed them to disperse into puffs of smoke. The lead Anbu slowly turned. "You think this changes anything, Jinchuriki? We are prepared to sacrifice one of our own to secure you." "Are you?" Naruto asked, his voice calm. He pressed the kunai a little harder. "Because I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to unmask him. And we're all going to find out who in this village thinks it's okay to hunt a Konoha shinobi in the forest of death." The threat was more potent than any promise of violence. Their anonymity was their greatest weapon. To be exposed would be a disgrace, and a death sentence from Danzo himself. Silence descended. The 3 remaining Anbu were perfectly still, weighing their options. The one in Naruto's grasp was rigid with tension. "Your choice," Naruto said softly. The standoff stretched for a long, taut minute. Then, the lead Anbu slowly sheathed his sword. "Release him. We will withdraw." Naruto hesitated, then gave the operative a hard shove forward, sending him stumbling towards his comrades. "Get out of this forest. All of you. This test is over." The 4 Anbu exchanged a look. Then, without another word, they flickered and vanished into the trees. Naruto stood alone in the silent clearing, his heart pounding. He had won. He had faced down elite Anbu and forced them to retreat. A surge of triumph washed over him, quickly followed by a bone-deep exhaustion. He leaned against a tree, his legs trembling slightly. "You were lucky," Kurama grumbled, though the usual bite was missing from his tone. "Their orders were likely to capture, not to kill outright. That gave you leverage." Naruto didn't answer. He was listening, sensing. The Anbu were gone. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. That's when he felt it. A new presence. It wasn't a chakra signature. It was a cold spot in the spiritual ocean, a void of energy that felt fundamentally wrong. He turned, his eyes scanning the twilight gloom. And then he saw them. Ibiki and the 2 Jonin. They were standing at the edge of the clearing, having watched the entire exchange. Ibiki was clapping slowly, a dry, rasping sound that was anything but congratulatory. "Well done, Uzumaki," Ibiki said, his scarred face impassive. "You exceeded our expectations. You dealt with the poachers admirably. But that was just the warm-up." The 2 Jonin beside him began to weave hand signs, their movements fast and synchronized. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive, powerful chakra. "The initial test was to gauge your tactical abilities," Ibiki continued, his voice dropping. "This next test is to gauge your container's integrity. We need to know exactly how much pressure it can withstand before it breaks." The ground around Naruto began to glow with intricate, purple lines. A sealing array. They hadn't been hurting him to a killing ground. They had been hurting him into this. The entire clearing was a massive, pre-laid trap. 5-pronged sealing formation. Unbreakable prison. The two Jonin shouted in unison. Pillars of purple energy erupted from the ground, forming a cage around him. The air inside crackled, and Naruto felt his own chakra being suppressed, choked off at the source. It was like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. They're trying to sever our connection. Kurama roared, his voice filled with fury and a hint of panic. They want to isolate you, break your will, and see if the seal holds. Fools! If the seal weakens without your will to maintain it, I'll tear my way out and destroy them all. Naruto gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. The pressure was immense, a physical weight crushing him from all sides. He felt his connection to the fox flickering, the vast reservoir of red chakra suddenly feeling a universe away. Outside the cage, Ibiki watched, his expression cold and analytical. Let's increase the pressure. One of the Jonin made a new sign. Earth style. Earth and stone dragon. The ground inside the cage roiled, and a massive dragon made of rock and soil surged upwards, its stony maw gaping as it lunged for him. With his chakra suppressed, he couldn't dodge, couldn't use a substitution. He was a sitting duck. He threw himself to the side, but the dragon was too fast, too large. Its massive head slammed into him, sending him flying into the crackling purple wall of the barrier. The impact was brutal, knocking the wind from his lungs and sending a starburst of pain through his ribs. The barrier sizzled against his back, burning him and amplifying the suppression effect. He collapsed to the ground, gasping, his vision swimming. Fight! Kurama screamed, his voice a distant echo now. Don't let them do this. Another attack came, a volley of wind bullets that sliced into the earth around him, kicking up dirt and shredding his jumpsuit. One caught his arm, leaving a deep, bleeding gash. The pain was sharp and clear. He was going to die. Or worse, he was going to break, and the Kyuubi would be unleashed, proving Danzo and everyone else right. He would become the monster. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. He could see Ibiki's impassive face through the shimmering barrier. The look in his eyes was not of malice, but of cold, detached necessity. To him, Naruto wasn't a person. He was an experiment. It's not enough, Ibiki stated, his voice carrying clearly into the cage. He's still resisting. Prepare the final measure. The second Jonin stepped forward, pulling a scroll from his vest. He unrolled it, revealing a complex, terrifying seal matrix written in what looked like blood. Forbidden sealing art. Soul rend. Ibiki's eyes widened slightly. As that authorized Lord Danzo's contingency, the Jonin replied grimly. It will not kill him. It will temporarily sever the conscious mind from the body, leaving only the seal and the beast. We will see how they interact in a pure state. It was the ultimate violation. They were going to peel his soul away, leaving his body a mindless vessel for their grotesque experiment. Rage, pure and undiluted, washed through Naruto. Not the Kyuubi's borrowed fury, but his own. A rage born of a lifetime of isolation, of being treated as a thing, a weapon, a problem. A rage at the sheer, soul-crushing injustice of it all. No, the word was not spoken. It was a silent, primal scream that echoed in the deepest corner of his being. I will not be your experiment. I will not be your monster. I will not be your cage. He felt Kurama's distant, fading roar, offering power, begging him to take it. And for the first time, with absolute clarity, he rejected it completely. This is mine. He didn't reach for chakra. There was none to be had. He reached for the other power. The silver, quiet, infinite ocean of spiritual particles that made up the universe. He reached for it with the full, focused intent of his enraged, desperate soul. And the universe answered. Time didn't slow down. It shattered. From Naruto's perspective, the world went dead silent and monochrome. The advancing Jonin, the impassive Ibiki, he crackling purple barrier, they were all frozen, rendered in shades of gray. And he could see them. The threads, shimmering, silver lifelines of spiritual energy and causality, connecting everything. He saw the intricate tapestry of the sealing jutsu, a dense, ugly knot of purple threads woven around him. He saw the threads connecting the Jonin to their jutsu, the threads of Ibiki's intent, the complex, corrupted threads that made up Danzo's influence from afar. He saw the vibrant, chaotic, burning red threads of Kurama's being, thrashing against the golden threads of the fourth Hokage's seal on his stomach. And he saw the forbidden jutsu the Jonin was preparing. It was a horrifying construct, a snarl of black, decaying threads designed to hook into the silver threads of Naruto's own soul and tear them loose. He lifted a hand, no longer feeling the pain in his body. He was something else now. A consciousness observing the source code of reality. He looked at the ugly purple cage woven around him. He saw the primary knot, the linchpin of the entire jutsu. With a thought, he reached out and gently pulled. It was like pulling the starting thread on a cheap sweater. In the real world, the effect was cataclysmic. The unbreakable prison, a powerful A-rank ceiling formation, did not shatter. It did not explode. It unraveled. The purple pillars of light dissolved into shimmering dust. The intricate lines on the ground fading to nothing. The oppressive pressure vanished in an instant. Ibiki and the two Jonin stared, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. A jutsu of that magnitude didn't just stop. Naruto stood in the center of the now inert circle, his head bowed. He slowly lifted his gaze, and his eyes were no longer the vibrant blue they had been. They were glowing with a soft, silver light. Cold and ancient. You wanted to see what happens under pressure, he said, his voice eerily calm, layered with a strange resonance. Here it is. He took a step. The Jonin who had been preparing the Soul Rend Jutsu instinctively threw up a hand, ready to defend himself. Naruto didn't even look at him. He simply flicked his wrist. The Jonin froze. He looked down at his hands. The forbidden scroll he was holding crumbled into inert, gray dust. The chakra he was channeling vanished, leaving him feeling hollowed out and weak. Naruto hadn't attacked him. He had unwoven the jutsu from existence before it was even cast. The second Jonin, panicking, charged forward, a chakra blade flaring to life on his hand. Monster. Naruto turned his silver gaze on the man. He raised a hand, his fingers slightly curled, as if holding a collection of invisible strings. He made a soft, pulling motion. The charging Jonin's legs went out from under him. He collapsed in a heap, his body suddenly refusing to obey his commands. Naruto had done nothing physical. He had simply severed the connection, the threads of intent, between the shinobi's brain and his limbs. Ibiki Morino, a man who had faced down the worst horrors imaginable and never flinched, took an involuntary step back. The raw power was terrifying, but that wasn't what scared him. It was the nature of it. This wasn't a jutsu. It wasn't a bloodline he recognized. This was something else, something fundamental. It was as if the boy was editing the laws of reality on a whim. Naruto's silver eyes finally settled on Ibiki. This is over. But the act of pulling on the fundamental threads of the world, of unmaking powerful jutsu with a thought, had created a strain. A weakness. His power, raw and untamed, had torn something. A sound filled the air. Not an explosion, but the sound of reality tearing like old cloth. Behind Naruto, the air shimmered and then ripped open. It was not a neat portal. It was a jagged, bleeding wound in the fabric of space, a vertical gash of wrongness. Through the tear, there was no blue sky or green forest. There was a stark, white, and gray world under a perpetually overcast sky. Monolithic structures of pale stone and dark glass jutted into the air, impossibly clean and severe. The air that billowed out was cold, sterile, and thick with an energy that made the ambient spiritual particles of their own world feel thin and diluted. Ibiki and the two paralyzed Jonin stared in horror. What in the name of all the gods was that? Naruto turned to look at the rift he had created. He felt no fear, only a strange, dizzying sense of connection. He could feel what was on the other side. A presence. No, not one. Thousands. Millions. A whole civilization of beings whose spiritual pressure was a constant, deafening roar. They were like him. Or, rather, he was like them. And then, out of the millions, one presence focused on him. It was an ancient, immeasurable power. A consciousness as vast and deep as a starless night sky. Its gaze cut through the rift, through the distance, and landed squarely on Naruto's soul. It was a gaze of shock, of recognition, and of an immediate, absolute, and terrifying sense of ownership. The strain of holding the rift open was too much. The world swam around Naruto, the silver light in his eyes flickering. The tear in reality began to stitch itself shut, the edges pulling together with another sickening tearing sound. As the rift sealed to a final, fading sliver of light, Naruto felt the gaze of the thousands of souls turn in his direction. Their collective attention a physical weight. The last thing he saw before it closed completely was the silent, sterile cityscape of a world he had never known, yet somehow felt like home. The rift vanished. Silence returned to the forest of death. Naruto swayed on his feet, the immense power receding, leaving him drained and shaking. The silver glow in his eyes faded, returning them to their normal, exhausted blue. He was bleeding from his nose, and a thin trickle of blood ran from the corner of his eye. He looked at the two incapacitated Jonin, and at the terrified, speechless Ibiki Morino. He had survived. He had won. But he had also just announced his existence to an entire world of unknowns. Far away, in his barren apartment, the small, silver bird sitting on his desk lifted its head. It turned its perfectly crafted face not towards the forest of death, but towards the empty spot in the sky where the rift had been. It stood perfectly still, a silent king's silent messenger, staring at the point of contact, a silent promise of what was to come. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Exploding Queen. The silence that followed the unmaking of reality was heavier than any sound. It was a vacuum, filled only by the ragged gasps of the three Konoha shinobi and the unsteady beat of Naruto's own heart. He stood in the center of the clearing, a solitary figure against the encroaching twilight. His body a trembling testament to the power that had just ripped through him. The silver light had faded from his eyes, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion that settled into his bones like a terminal chill. Ibiki Morino, a man whose entire existence was predicated on breaking the wills of others, found that he had no will left to assert. The fear he felt was a cold, alien thing. It was not the fear of a powerful enemy or a gruesome death. It was a primal, intellectual terror, the kind a mathematician might feel upon discovering that 2 + 2 no longer equaled 4. The boy, no, the entity, hadn't just defeated them. He had edited the rules of their world, treated their most powerful seals and jutsu as suggestions to be dismissed. What was that? One of the Jonin, still sprawled on the ground, whispered. His limbs were his own again, but the phantom sensation of disconnection made him unwilling to test them. The memory of his body betraying his mind as a deeper wound than any blade could leave. Naruto swayed, his vision tunneling. He felt the blood, warm and sticky, on his face. The power, the weaver as a silent part of him had named it, had receded, leaving him feeling hollowed out. Scoured clean, he looked at Ibiki, at the undisguised terror on the man's scarred face, and found no satisfaction in it. Only a profound weariness. The test is over, Naruto said, his voice raspy. Each word an effort. He turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and began the slow, painful walk out of the clearing. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel their gazes on him, a mixture of fear, awe, and a dawning, horrified comprehension. He was no longer Konoha's Jinchuriki. He was something else, a problem without a solution. He stumbled through the dark woods, his enhanced senses now a curse, picking up the frantic scurrying of unseen animals and the rustle of every leaf, each sound grating on his frayed nerves. He needed to get back to his apartment, to the silence, to Jin, the one piece of this new, terrifying power that felt like a comfort rather than a weapon. You tore a hole in the world, Kit, Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind. It was faint, distant, as if shouted across a vast chasm. The sealing jutsu had weakened their connection more than he'd realized. Whatever you did, it called to them. The ones on the other side. I know, Naruto thought, the effort making his head throb. I felt them. He felt them still, a faint, residual echo in the spiritual fabric of the world. A dissonant chord in a song he was only just beginning to hear. As he finally broke through the tree line, leaving the oppressive darkness of the forest of death behind, the first signs of dawn were painting the eastern sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange. The village was still quiet, asleep. He was grateful for the reprieve from the stares, the whispers, the suffocating silence. But the silence that greeted him was different. It wasn't empty. The air, usually a thin, placid sea of ambient reishi, was thick. Agitated. It felt like the air before a lightning strike, charged with a potent, alien energy. Naruto stopped, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. His head snapped up, his senses casting out, not with chakra, but with the faint remnants of his weaver perception. The energy was concentrated above him. A spot in the sky, directly over the village outskirts, was growing darker, but it wasn't a cloud. It was a patch of sky that was actively absorbing the light, a spreading stain of pure shadow. From that stain, 5 figures descended. They did not fall. They simply arrived, their descent controlled and silent, their feet touching the ground without a sound. They stood in a loose formation on the path ahead of him, blocking his way back to the village. The pressure they exuded was immense, a physical weight that made the air feel like syrup. It was the same energy he had felt from beyond the rift. But now it was here, potent and immediate. The figure in the lead was a girl who looked to be his age, perhaps a little older. She had ash blonde hair tied into twin drills, and her eyes, a sharp, piercing shade of pink, scanned the area with an expression of bored impatience. She wore a pristine white, double-breasted jacket over a short black skirt, with long white boots and gloves. It was a uniform, severe and immaculate, a stark contrast to the practical, earth-toned flak jackets of Konoha shinobi. 4 other girls flanked her, all clad in similar, yet personalized, versions of the uniform. One had jagged, lightning bolt-shaped pupils and a perpetual scowl. Another was short, with dark hair and a cynical smirk, chewing on a piece of jerky. A taller, well-built girl with wavy brown hair stood with a placid, almost vacant expression. And the last one had greenish hair and a disturbingly sweet, almost vacant smile, her head tilted at an odd angle. She looked at Naruto with wide, curious eyes, a faint trail of drool glistening on her chin. The leader, the one with the pink eyes, finally let her gaze settle on Naruto. She took in his torn orange jumpsuit. The dirt and blood smudged on his face, the exhaustion etched into his posture. A look of profound disappointment crossed her features. "Don't tell me this is it," she said, her voice sharp and imperious. "We felt a power that buckled a dimension, and this is what we find. A filthy, lost little animal." She wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Candace, did we read the spiritual residue wrong?" "The one with the lightning bolt pupils," Candace snorted. "The residue is off the charts, Bambi. It's definitely coming from him. Maybe he just got lucky and tripped over some ancient artifact. Or maybe he's just really good at hiding it," the short, cynical one, Liltado, added without taking her eyes off Naruto, her chewing slowing as she assessed him. "He doesn't look like much, but a cornered rat can still bite." He, the green-haired one, Giselle, cooed, taking a shuffling step forward. "He's kinda cute, in a pathetic, needs to be dissected kind of way. Can I have him when you're done, Bambi?" "Shut up, Gigi," the leader, Bambi, snapped without looking at her. Her full attention was on Naruto, her pink eyes narrowed in scrutiny. His Majesty felt a Quincy of unprecedented power. "I was sent to verify it." She took a step forward, her boots making a soft crunch on the gravel path. "So, which is it, little rat? Are you a Quincy, or just some freak who got lucky?" Quincy. The word struck a chord deep within him. It was a name for what he was, for the power he had felt. It was the key. Naruto pushed his exhaustion down, forcing himself to stand straighter. He met the girl's arrogant gaze with a calm he didn't feel. His mind was racing, analyzing the situation. 5 opponents, all radiating immense spiritual pressure. They weren't shinobi. Their power felt different, more refined, more absolute. Arguing or running was pointless. They hadn't come for a conversation. "I don't know what a Quincy is," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "But if you've come all this way for a fight, you should at least have the decency to introduce yourself." The girl's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of surprise breaking through her arrogance. Then, she laughed. It was a sharp, grating sound, devoid of humor. "Decency. Oh, that's rich." She struck a pose, placing a gloved hand on her hip. "Fine. If you're about to die, you might as well know by whose hand. I am Sternritter, Bambietta Basterbine." She gestured grandly at herself. "And my power is," the explode. Candace cracked her knuckles, lightning arcing between them. Sternritter. Chi. The thunderbolt. Liltato gave a lazy, two-fingered salute. G. The glutton. The tall, quiet one, Menina's, simply nodded, her expression unchanged. P. The power. Giselle giggled, clapping her hands together. Z. The zombie. It's a pleasure to meet you, Tilda. Sternritter. The name meant nothing to him, but the casual way they announced their powers told him everything he needed to know. They were an elite unit, and their confidence was absolute. Now, Bambietta said, her brief moment of theatricality over, I'm going to ask you one more time. Show me the power you used to tear a hole in space-time. Or I will personally render you down to your component atoms. Naruto took a slow breath. He could feel Kurama's distant rage, a useless ember. He couldn't rely on that. He could only rely on himself. On the quiet, silver ocean of power that was his, and his alone. I don't think you want that, he replied, his voice still level. Bambietta's eye twitched. The sheer audacity of this filthy boy talking back to her was infuriating. Oh, and why is that? Because, Naruto said, his blue eyes hardening into chips of ice. Your power is loud. I prefer the quiet. For a full second, Bambietta just stared at him, processing the sheer, unbelievable arrogance of his statement. Then, her face contorted into a mask of pure fury. You insolent little. That's it. I'm done talking. She lifted her hand, and the reishi in the air coalesced around it with terrifying speed. A shimmering sphere of pure, condensed spiritual energy, the size of a melon, formed above her palm. It pulsed with a malevolent, destructive light. Let's see how quiet you are when you're screaming. She shrieked, and thrust her hand forward. The sphere shot towards Naruto, not with the speed of a projectile, but with an instantaneous, teleportation-like quickness. In the fraction of a second it took to cross the distance, Naruto's mind went perfectly clear. He didn't have time to dodge in the conventional sense. So he didn't. He used Harenkyaku. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was pure instinct. He focused on a point 3 feet to his left, and willed himself to be there. The world dissolved into a blue-white blur for an instant, and then reformed. He was standing exactly where he had intended, his feet planted firmly on the ground. The sphere of energy, its target having vanished, flew past and slammed into the treeline behind him. The explosion was apocalyptic. It was not the fiery blast of a paper bomb or a fire-style jutsu. It was a silent, concussive wave of pure force. A perfect dome of white energy expanded outwards. And everything it touched, trees, earth, rock, was not burned or shattered, but utterly, completely annihilated. Disintegrated. When the light faded, a perfect, 50-foot wide hemisphere here had been carved out of the forest of death, the edges of the crater unnaturally smooth, as if scooped out by a giant, cosmic ice cream spoon. Candace whistled. Whoa, Bambi, easy on the furniture. We still need him in one piece. Bambietta wasn't listening. She was staring at Naruto, her face a mixture of fury and disbelief. You dodged it. How did you dodge that? She didn't wait for an answer. She created 3 more spheres. Her movements sharp and angry, and flung them at him in rapid succession. Naruto moved again. Harenkyaku. Left, right, back. Each movement was a short, instantaneous burst of speed. A flicker of motion that put him just outside the blast radius of each detonation. More perfect, silent craters were carved into the landscape around him. The ground trembled. The air crackled with raw power. To the other Sternritter, it looked like he was dancing through a god's tantrum, moving with an impossible, preternatural grace. Okay, this is getting interesting, Liltato commented, popping another piece of jerky into her mouth. He's using Harenkyaku. A pretty sloppy, instinctual version of it, but it's definitely Harenkyaku. He's a Quincy. All right, Candace grumbled, looking annoyed that she wasn't the one fighting. No Shinigami or human moves like that. Bambietta was breathing heavily, her face flushed with rage. Her power was absolute destruction. Nothing survived it. The idea that someone could just step out of its way was a personal insult. Stop dodging and fight me, she screamed, creating a dozen orbs at once, which she sent flying in a scattered, unavoidable pattern. This time, Naruto didn't move. He stood his ground as the swarm of destructive light descended on him. You're insane, Kit, Kurama's distant voice was a shriek of panic. But Naruto was calm. The world had slowed down, and he could see them again. The threads. Each of Bambietta's bombs was a tight, angry knot of reishi threads. But woven into them, fundamentally a part of them, was another, more conceptual thread. It was the thread of her power, her will, her very soul's intent. Explode. He lifted a hand, not to block, but to receive. He didn't need overwhelming power to counter her. He just needed to be smarter. He was the weaver. As the first sphere reached him, close enough for him to feel the immense, unstable energy it contained, he reached out with his own power. He didn't try to stop the orb. He didn't try to contain it. He simply found that one, conceptual thread of explode, and gently pulled it loose. The effect was immediate and baffling. The orb, which a moment before had been a harbinger of annihilation, simply fizzled. It dissolved in a soft shower of harmless, silvery reishi particles that drifted down around Naruto like snow. One after another, the spheres reached him. And one after another, they unraveled, their destructive purpose dismantled at a fundamental level. The air around him filled with a silent, shimmering blizzard of inert energy. He stood untouched in the center of the storm, his hand outstretched, his expression placid. The clearing fell silent. The other four Sternritter were speechless. Giselle's creepy smile had faltered. Menina's placid expression was now one of clear surprise. Liltato had stopped chewing. Candace's mouth was hanging open. Bambietta stared, her mind refusing to compute what she had just witnessed. Her power, the very definition of her existence, had been negated. Not blocked, not overpowered. It had been undone. As if it were a cheap trick. What did you do? She whispered, the words catching in her throat. The fear she was feeling was a new and terrifying sensation. It was the fear of being made irrelevant. Your power is a sentence, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady as he lowered his hand. The silver particles danced around him. You write it into the world. This will explode. All I did was erase the verb. This explanation, so simple and yet so fundamentally impossible, broke something in Bambietta. The fear was instantly consumed by a fresh wave of incandescent rage. You think you're better than me? She roared, her spiritual pressure flaring to an insane degree. You think you can mock me? I'll show you what true power is. A torrent of reishi erupted from her, a pillar of white-hot energy that shot into the overcast sky. Feather. Wings of pure spiritual energy burst from her back, and a jagged, star-shaped halo formed above her head. Quincy. Vollständig. Sclavere des Lichts. Her form changed, her uniform shifting, becoming more ornate, more angelic, and radiating a power that dwarfed what she had shown before. The ground cracked beneath her feet. Now, let's see you erase this. She didn't create orbs this time. She simply pointed a finger at Naruto. And the very ground he stood on became a bomb. Her will, the explode, was infused directly into the earth itself. But Naruto had already seen it coming. He saw the threads of her intent snake through the ground, converging on his position. Before the detonation could even begin, he was already moving, using Harenkyaku to appear 20 feet away. Boom! A massive chunk of the battlefield erupted upwards, a geyser of rock and soil atomized by the force. Bambietta didn't let up. She waved her hand, and the air itself around Naruto became explosive. He flickered away again, another blast tearing through the space he had just occupied. She was faster now, her power more widespread, more absolute. But he was still faster. And his perception was perfect. It was a deadly dance. She would designate a target for destruction, and he would perceive the intent and vacate the area before the effect could manifest. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He was simply flowing, a leaf on a violent, explosive river, never caught by the current. To Bambietta, it was maddening. It was like trying to punch water. Every blow was devastating, yet every blow missed its mark. She was expending an immense amount of power, and he was using the bare minimum necessary to stay one step ahead. He was making a mockery of her Vollständig. Why won't you just die? She screamed, her frustration reaching a fever pitch. She gathered all her power, the air for 100 yards around her beginning to shimmer and vibrate with unstable energy. If I can't hit you, I'll just blow up everything. Liltato's eyes widened. She's lost it. She's going to level the whole area, us included. Candace swore, grabbing Meninaz's arm. Come on, we gotta get clear. Even Giselle looked nervous, backing away. Ah, Bambi, don't be a spoilsport. Bambietta was beyond reason. Her pink eyes glowed with furious light. This was it, the ultimate expression of her power. Total, indiscriminate annihilation. But as she was about to unleash it, a calm voice cut through her rage. That's enough. Naruto was no longer dodging. He was standing right in front of her, less than an arm's length away. She hadn't even seen him move. Her massive, unfocused attack, her senses on a knife's edge, none of it had registered his final, perfect Harenkyaku. He had closed the distance in an instant of pure, silent motion. She stared at him, her mind blank with shock. He raised his right hand. A blade of pure, condensed silver reishi, shaped like a wickedly sharp dagger, formed in his grip. It was a Hylig file, a Quincy's sacred arrow. But refined, solidified, made personal. It hummed with a quiet, deadly power that was the absolute antithesis of her own chaotic energy. He didn't thrust. He didn't slash. He simply placed the tip of the blade against the hollow of her throat. It was cold. The torrent of power she had been about to unleash died in her throat. The air settled. Her wings of light flickered. All her rage, all her overwhelming force, was held in check by a single, quiet point of steel-like energy and the unwavering calm in his blue eyes. He leaned in, his voice a low, devastating murmur that only she could hear. Your power is loud, but you're not. It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis, a statement of fact. Her power was a scream for attention, a desperate, destructive tantrum. But she, the person at the center of it, was lost in the noise. He had seen it in the threads of her soul. The arrogance was a shield for a desperate need for validation. The destruction was a cry against her own fear of being weak. He had defeated her not by overpowering her, but by understanding her completely in a way no one ever had. The strength went out of Bambietta's legs. Her Vollständig dissolved, the wings of light fading into nothing. The power that had been about to reshape the landscape vanished. She would have collapsed if not for the sheer shock holding her upright. She stared at him, her mind reeling. Her entire sense of self shattered by a few quiet words in a battle she had lost before it even began. The other Sternritter, who had been scrambling to get away, stopped and stared at the scene. Bambietta, the exploding queen, the volatile force of nature, had been defeated. Not beaten into submission, but disarmed. Humbled. Candace's jaw was on the floor. No freaking way. A new presence made the air grow heavy. It was a different kind of pressure from Bambietta's. Hers had been a chaotic, raging storm. This was the crushing, absolute weight of a mountain. A man stepped out of a shadow that had formed unnoticed near the edge of the clearing. He was tall and slender, with long, pale blonde hair and calm, analytical green eyes behind a pair of spectacles. He wore a pristine white cape over a uniform similar to the others, but his exuded an aura of unquestionable authority. His spiritual pressure was immense, but it was perfectly, unnaturally controlled. It did not rage, it simply was. That is quite enough, Sternritter Basterbine. His voice was as calm and balanced as his presence. Bambietta flinched as if struck. The other four girls immediately snapped to attention. Their casual or aggressive postures replaced by ramrod straight formality. Fear, real fear, was plain on their faces. Lord Hashwolf, Candace stammered, bowing her head. The man, Hashwolf, ignored them. His entire focus was on Naruto and the blade of light he still held to Bambietta's throat. He assessed the scene with a single, sweeping glance, his expression unchanging. Naruto met his gaze. This man was different. He was the source of the immense, controlled pressure. If Bambietta was a raging fire, this man was the unyielding bedrock of a continent. He was on another level entirely. With a thought, Naruto allowed the reishi dagger in his hand to dissolve into silver light. He took a step back from the still frozen Bambietta. Hashwolf gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. A wise decision. Violence has served its purpose for today. His gaze lingered on Naruto, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his analytical eyes. The power you wield, is unmistakably Quincy in its foundation, yet its application is something new. You perceive the essence of things and unmake them. Fascinating. He took a step forward, his presence washing over Naruto. It was not hostile, but it was absolute. His Majesty, the King of the Quincy, you watch, has taken a great interest in your sudden appearance. He wishes to meet you. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. The King, you watch. The name from the ancient, powerful consciousness Naruto had felt through the rift. He has extended an invitation for you to accompany us back to the Silbern, the palace of the Wandenreich. Haschwalth continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. It is his desire to understand the nature of your power and the origins of your bloodline. It was phrased as an invitation, but the tone was that of a royal summons. Refusal was clearly not an option they had considered. Naruto looked from Haschwalth's impassive face to the stunned and humiliated Bambietta. To the nervous Sternritter behind her. He thought of Konoha, of Ibiki, of Danzo. He thought of the cold silence of the village and the violent test in the forest. The world he knew had just tried to dissect his soul. This new world, this Wandenreich, was dangerous, alien, and ruled by a god-like king who had already laid a claim on him. But it was also a world that held the answers. A world where he might not be a freak, a weapon, a container. A world where he might, for the first time, belong. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an inevitability. His path had led him here. He met Jugram Haschwalth's gaze. His own exhaustion and pain pushed down by a new, cold resolve. All right, Naruto said, the single word sealing his fate. All go. Chapter 2 end. Chapter 3. The Gilded Cage. The journey to the Wandenreich was not a journey at all. It was an act of transition, as seamless and disorienting as turning a page in a book. Haschwalth produced a small, ornate silver device. A medallion etched with the 5-pointed cross of the Quincy. He channeled his reishi into it, and the world dissolved. There was no gut-wrenching teleportation, no sense of vertigo. One moment, they were standing in the scarred, cratered clearing on the outskirts of Konoha, the rising sun casting long shadows. The next, they were somewhere else entirely. The air was the first thing Naruto noticed. It was cold, sterile, and so thick with spiritual particles it felt like breathing pure energy. It was the same atmosphere he had glimpsed through the rift, and his senses, his burgeoning Quincy abilities, drank it in like a man dying of thirst. The exhaustion that had settled deep in his bones began to recede, replaced by a quiet, humming vitality. He stood in a vast, open courtyard paved with bone-white stone that seemed to absorb all sound. The sky above was a uniform, pearlescent gray, a ceiling of endless cloud that offered no hint of a sun or moon. Towering structures of white stone and black glass climbed towards this sky. Their architecture severe, angular, and impossibly grand. They were not built so much as they were sculpted, monuments to an aesthetic of cold, absolute power. This was the Silbern, the Ice Palace. And it was a city built within a shadow. Bambietta and her retinue stood stiffly behind him, their earlier arrogance completely gone in the presence of Jugram Haschwalth. Bambietta, in particular, was a ghost. She stared straight ahead, her pink eyes vacant, her face a pale mask. The humiliation of her defeat was a palpable aura around her, a shroud of icy shame. She hadn't said a word since Naruto had disarmed her, hadn't even met his gaze. This way, Haschwalth said, his voice calm and authoritative. He led them from the courtyard into one of the monolithic structures. The interior was just as stark and imposing as the exterior. Vast, echoing halls were lined with stoic, white-clad soldiers, the soldat, who snapped to perfect attention as Haschwalth passed. They moved with a synchronized, almost robotic precision, their faces hidden behind visored helmets. Every one of them radiated a spiritual pressure far exceeding that of a standard Konoha Chunin. This was a nation built for war. Naruto walked beside Haschwalth, his senses taking everything in. He didn't feel like a guest. He felt like a prize being paraded through the victor's capital. He could feel the eyes on him from every soldier, every passing Quincy. Their gazes were a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and a deeply ingrained arrogance. They saw his tattered orange clothing, erring splash of color in their monochrome world, and judged him instantly. He ignored them. His attention was on the threads. Here, in this place of immense, concentrated reishi, his perception was magnified 100-fold. He could see the intricate web of connections that held this society together. Threads of unwavering, fanatical loyalty flowed from every soldier, every citizen, converging on a single distant point at the heart of the city, a presence so vast and blindingly powerful it was like staring into a sun. Yhwach. He also saw other threads. Threads of rivalry between the Sternritter he passed. Threads of fear, of ambition, of secret resentments. This perfect, orderly society was a facade, its pristine white surface hiding a complex, brutal internal structure. It was no different from Konoha, just on a grander, more honest scale. Finally, they arrived before a pair of colossal doors made of a polished black material that seemed to drink the light. They were easily 100 feet high, carved with the same 5-pointed star. 2 imposing guards, clad in heavier, more ornate armor, stood motionless on either side. At Hashwolf's approach, the massive doors swung open silently, revealing the throne room. The chamber was immense, a cathedral of power. The walls were black glass, reflecting the pearlescent sky and the white city outside, giving the illusion of being suspended in an endless, empty space. A long, white carpet stretched across the floor towards a throne carved from a single, massive piece of what looked like petrified ice. And on that throne, sat the king. Yhwach was a man who seemed both ancient and timeless. He had long, dark hair and a thick, formidable mustache and mutton chops. He wore a flowing black robe over his pristine white uniform, a heavy black cape draped over his shoulders. But it was his eyes that commanded all attention. They were not normal eyes. They were unsettling, possessing multiple pupils that seemed to shift and observe everything at once. They held an intelligence that was terrifyingly deep, a weariness that spoke of millennia, and a power that was absolute. The moment Naruto entered the room, he felt Yhwach's gaze settle on him. It was the same gaze he had felt through the rift, but 1,000 times more intense. It was a physical force, probing, analyzing, and judging his very soul. Hashwolf came to a stop, a respectful distance from the throne, and knelt, his head bowed. "Your Majesty, I have brought him." Bambietta and the others, who had followed them in, immediately dropped to one knee, their heads pressed to the floor. Their fear was a sharp, acrid scent in the air. Naruto remained standing. He felt the pressure from the throne increase, a silent command to kneel. It was a pressure that could buckle steel, a will that could shatter minds. He met it with his own quiet resolve, his feet planted firmly on the white carpet. He would not bow, not to the Hokage, not to Danzo, and not to this king. He had knelt for no one in his life, and he would not start now. A slow smile spread across Yhwach's face. It did not reach his multi-pupiled eyes. "You have a strong will," the king's voice boomed, echoing in the vast chamber. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience, a voice that shaped reality with every word. "Stronger than your blood would suggest. You are an Uzumaki, are you not? From the land of shinobi." It was not a question. "I am," Naruto said, his voice steady. The pressure intensified, but he held his ground. "And yet, you carry the blood of the Quincy," Yhwach continued, leaning forward slightly. His strange eyes fixed on Naruto. "My blood, a dormant seed, sleeping for 1,000 years, that has now awakened with a power not seen since the beginning. Tell me, son of my son, how is this possible?" Naruto's mind reeled. Son of my son. The implication was staggering. Was his Quincy heritage direct? Was he a descendant of this man? He thought of his mother, Kushina, and her vibrant red hair. The Uzumaki were known for their powerful life force and sealing jutsu, not this. Then he thought of his father, Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, a man he knew only through stories. A genius, a prodigy, a man whose origins were a mystery. Could it have come from him? "I don't know," Naruto answered honestly. "The power awakened on its own. It awakened out of desperation," Yhwach corrected him, his voice softening into a paternal, almost gentle tone. "I have seen it. I have seen your life. The loneliness, the hatred of your people. The cage they built around your soul. They tried to make you a beast. So you became a god instead." A fitting irony. Yhwach's eyes seemed to gaze into his past, and Naruto felt a chilling violation, as if his memories were being read from an open book. This was the king's power. The almighty. The ability to see all futures, and therefore, all pasts. "You tore a hole between worlds," Yhwach stated, his voice hardening again. "An act of immense, untamed power. An act that has not gone unnoticed. It has sent ripples across the dimensions, a beacon for things that slumber in the dark. He paused, his gaze becoming distant, focused and something far beyond the walls of his palace. There are old enemies, child. Beings of silence and consumption that the Quincy were first born to fight. Your awakening is a herald. It signals that the age of peace is over. The final war, the one for which I have prepared for a millennium, is about to begin. Naruto listened, absorbing the information. This, consuming silence, it was the same thing he'd felt as a whisper in the Silburn, the same thing that had created the void hollows in his vision. Yhwach was not just a conqueror. He was preparing for a threat that dwarfed his own ambitions. So, what do you want from me? Naruto asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Yhwach's smile returned. I want what is mine. Your power is an echo of my own, a fragment of my soul that has been lost and is now returned. I will teach you. I will guide you. You will become my finest soldier, my heir. You will stand beside me as we reclaim the world from the decadent soul reapers and prepare for the true enemy. The offer was grand, paternal, and utterly suffocating. It was a gilded cage, more beautiful and far more dangerous than the one Konoha had built for him. Yhwach didn't want a partner. He wanted a weapon, a tool, an heir to be molded and eventually, Naruto suspected, absorbed. I walk my own path, Naruto said, his voice firm. It was the same thing he had told Kurama 1,000 times. But now he was saying it to a man who called himself a god. The silence in the throne room became absolute. Haschwalth, still kneeling, tensed. Bambietta and her friends seemed to shrink into the floor. Yhwach's expression did not change, but the pressure in the room became a crushing, physical force. It felt as if the entire city were pressing down on Naruto's shoulders. There is no path but mine, Yhwach said. His voice a low, dangerous rumble. All things in this world exist for my sake. Your power, your life, your very soul, they are all mine to command. Naruto gritted his teeth, his legs threatening to buckle. He felt the silver power within him stir, not to attack, but to defend, weaving a subtle reinforcement through the threads of his own being, resisting the king's overwhelming will. He held. For a long, tense moment, it was a silent battle of wills. The king on his throne, exerting the pressure of his absolute authority, and the boy in rags, refusing to bend. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Yhwach laughed. It was a deep, genuine, booming laugh that echoed through the vast hall. The pressure vanished as if it had never been there. Excellent, the king declared, clapping a hand on the arm of his throne. Such defiance, such strength. It has been too long since anyone has dared to look me in the eye and refuse. Very well, boy, you wish to walk your own path. Then walk it, here, in my city. Let us see where it leads. He waved a dismissive hand. Jugram, he is a guest, for now. Assign him quarters, and a guide. His eyes, twinkling with a dangerous light, flickered to the still kneeling form of Bambietta Basterbine. Sternritter, showed such initiative in greeting our guest. She can continue to serve as his warden. Show him our ways, teach him our laws, ensure he understands his place. Bambietta's head shot up, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. Your Majesty, is that an objection, Sternritter Basterbine? Yhwach's voice was silk-wrapped steel. No, Your Majesty, she said immediately, pressing her face back to the floor. It would be an honor. The words were choked with humiliation. To be made the babysitter of the boy who had so utterly dismantled her was the ultimate punishment. Good, Yhwach said, settling back into his throne. His gaze fell on Naruto one last time. We will speak again, Naruto Uzumaki. There is much for us to discuss. About your power, about my plans, and about the darkness that is coming for us all. He closed his eyes, a clear dismissal. The audience was over. You heard His Majesty, Haschwalth said, rising gracefully. Come. Naruto gave the king on the throne one last look before turning and following Haschwalth out of the throne room. Bambietta and her retinue scrambled to their feet and followed, a gaggle of misery and simmering resentment trailing in his wake. The quarters assigned to him were in a different spire from the main palace, a residential tower for the high-ranking Sternritter. The room was opulent and cold, a suite of rooms larger than his entire Konoha apartment building. It was all white stone, black furniture, and vast glass windows looking out over the silent, sprawling city. A gilded cage indeed. These are your quarters, Hashwolf stated, his tone flat. You will be provided for. You are not a prisoner, but you are not to leave this tower without your assigned escort. Any attempt to flee the Silburn will be met with lethal force. Do you understand? I understand, Naruto said, his eyes scanning the room. Hashwolf turned to Bambietta, who was standing stiffly by the door. Her friends hovering behind her. Bambietta Basterbine, your orders are clear. You are responsible for him. His education in our ways, his conduct, and his continued presence in this city. Do not fail. Yes, Lord Hashwolf, she ground out, her jaw tight. With a final, lingering look at Naruto, Hashwolf turned and left, his footsteps silent in the hallway. The moment he was gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Well, this is just fantastic, Candace drawled, slumping against a wall. Stuck playing nanny to the freak who neutered Bambi. Bambietta whirled on her, her face a mask of fury. Shut your mouth, Candace. Just shut it, or what? Candace shot back, her own temper flaring. You'll throw a bomb at me. Oh wait, you can't. He might. Erase the verb. Bambietta let out a choked sound of rage and lunged at her, but Meninas, the tall, quiet one, stepped between them, holding Bambietta back with surprising ease. Stop it, both of you. This is what the king commanded. Fighting each other is pointless. Liltato, ever the pragmatist, was already raiding the room's fully stocked pantry. She's right. Besides, this could be fun. The new toy is our responsibility. We can do whatever we want with him, as long as he stays in one piece. She looked Naruto up and down with a predatory grin. Giselle giggled, sidling up to Naruto and sniffing him. He doesn't smell like a freak. He smells like ozone. And trouble. I like it. Naruto ignored them all, his attention drawn to something else. He walked to the vast window, placing a hand on the cool glass. He looked out at the impossible city, at the endless gray sky. And he felt it again. A subtle wrongness. A dead spot in the vibrant ocean of Reishi. It was faint, like a dissonant note in a grand symphony, but it was there. A small patch of the city, a forgotten district near the outer wall, felt empty. Devoid of spiritual energy, a whisper of the consuming silence Yuwatch had spoken of. Hi's gaze was drawn back to his own reflection in the black glass. A boy in rags, a world away from home, surrounded by enemies and uncertain allies, a pawn in a god's game. But Yuwatch was wrong about one thing. He wasn't a lost fragment of the king's soul. The power he felt, the weaver, was his. It was quiet, precise, and it saw the truth behind the facades. It saw the fear behind Bambietta's rage, the ambition behind Hashwolf's loyalty, the ancient dread behind Yuwatch's tyranny. And it saw the threads of this gilded cage. He would learn them. He would understand them. And when the time was right, he would unravel them. So, a sharp voice said from behind him, startling him from his thoughts. He turned. The others had left, but Bambietta remained. She stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed. Her expression a complex storm of anger, humiliation, and a grudging, resentful curiosity. The king wants me to be your guide, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Fine. Your first lesson, freak, in the Wandenreich. Strength is everything. The weak are tools for the strong. You got lucky today. You embarrassed me, but don't you ever forget, this is my world. And you're just living in it. Naruto met her furious pink eyes and saw, for the first time, the raw, desperate person underneath the bluster. He saw the threads of her pride, frayed and torn. He saw the knot of insecurity at her core. And he felt something that surprised him. Not pity, empathy. Her desperate need to prove her strength, to be seen, to be valued. It was a mirror of his own lonely childhood, just expressed with explosions instead of pranks. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. All right, Bambietta Basterbine, show me your world. His use of her full name, the quiet sincerity in his voice, threw her off guard. She had expected defiance, arrogance, mockery. She didn't know how to respond to this quiet acceptance. For a moment, the fury in her eyes was replaced by confusion. She scoffed, turning away to hide her expression. Don't get comfortable. Training starts tomorrow at dawn. We'll see how clever you are when you're facing someone who doesn't just throw bombs." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Naruto stood alone in the silent, opulent suite. He was a prisoner, a guest, a weapon, an heir. He was surrounded by danger and intrigue. But as he looked out at the alien city, he felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in his life, he was in a place that could understand his power. He was no longer just the Kyuubi's container. He was a Quincy. He was about to show them all what that truly meant. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Threads of a Forgotten Vow. The training grounds of the Wandenreich were as severe and imposing as the rest of the city. A vast, flat plain of the same white stone, enclosed by high walls, where the only features were the occasional scorch marks and craters left behind by previous spars. The perpetual gray sky served as a constant, oppressive ceiling. It was a place stripped of all distraction, designed for the singular purpose of honing destructive power. Naruto stood in the center of the arena, the cold, reishi rich air a stark contrast to the humid forests of his homeland. He wore a simple, functional uniform that had been left for him, black trousers and a form-fitting white tunic, a far cry from his jarring orange jumpsuit. It felt strange, like wearing another person's skin, but it was practical. It didn't scream for attention. Across from him, Bambietta paced like a caged animal. Her rage from the day before had simmered down into a tense, volatile energy. She had been tasked with training him, an order from the king himself, and the humiliation of it was a fire in her gut. She was determined to break him. To prove that his victory over her had been a fluke, a trick. The foundation of a Quincy's power is the manipulation of reishi, she began, her voice sharp and lecturing, like a teacher who despised her student. She stopped pacing and pointed a finger at him. Everything around us, the air, the stone, everything, is made of it. A shinobi borrows energy from their own soul. A Quincy takes it from the world. We dominate our environment. She held out her hand, and the air shimmered. Particles of light, invisible to a normal eye, rushed towards her, coalescing into a glowing orb. It was one of her signature bombs. But smaller, more controlled. This is basic reishi concentration. You can obviously do it, or you wouldn't have been able to make that pathetic little knife. Now, show me. Naruto closed his eyes. He didn't need to see. He could feel the ocean of energy around him. He had been doing this instinctively for months, drawing on the ambient hatred of Konoha, but here, the reishi was so pure, so abundant. It was like breathing water after a lifetime in the desert. He held out his hand and focused, not on dominating, but on inviting. He didn't pull the reishi, he created a space for it to flow. A sphere of silver light formed in his palm. It was different from hers. Hers was a chaotic, vibrating knot of power, barely contained. His was perfectly smooth, silent, and stable, its light soft and steady. It was a miniature star, calm and self-possessed. Bambietta's eye twitched. Even in this simple exercise, he was different. Unorthodox. Annoying. Fine, she snapped, dissipating her own orb. You can gather it, but can you shape it? A Quincy's primary weapon is the Heilig File, the sacred arrow. It is an extension of our will. Create one, she demonstrated, pulling a long, elegant bow from a silver bracelet on her wrist, a Quincy cross. She knocked a shimmering arrow of light and fired it at a distant target wall. The arrow flew with incredible speed and struck the wall with a thunderous crack, leaving a deep, smoking crater. Naruto watched, not the arrow, but the threads. He saw how she wove the reishi into the shape of a bow, how she infused the arrow with a singular purpose, strike. It was a crude but effective form of weaving. He didn't have a Quincy cross, but he didn't need one. He held up his hand, and reishi flowed to him. He didn't form a bow. He simply wove the threads of light directly into the shape of an arrow in his open palm. It was shorter than hers, more like a thick, heavy crossbow bolt, and it hummed with a quiet, condensed power. He looked at the target wall, then back at his arrow. He didn't need to fire it. He just needed it to arrive. He focused his will, not on the arrow's flight, but on its destination. He saw the thread of causality, the line between its current position and the target, and he simply pulled the destination closer. The arrow didn't fly, it vanished from his hand and simultaneously appeared, embedded deep in the stone wall. a foot to the left of her own crater. There was no sound of impact, no explosive release of energy. It was just there. The only evidence of its passage was a faint, shimmering distortion in the air. Like a heat haze, Bambietta stared at the arrow, then back at him, her mouth slightly agape. What was that? That wasn't Herenkyaku. You didn't fire it, it just appeared. It's more efficient, Naruto said simply. Why waste energy on travel when you can just be there? Efficient, she sputtered, her frustration mounting. That's not how it works. You're breaking the rules. They're your rules, he replied, his gaze calm. Not mine. This was their pattern for the next several days. Every technique Bambietta tried to teach him, from the basics of blood ven for defense to the high-speed movements of Herenkyaku, he would learn instantly, then refine, reinterpret, and perfect in a way that was utterly alien to her. He didn't just learn the how, his Veer perception allowed him to see the why. He saw the fundamental principles behind the techniques, the threads of intent and energy that formed them, and he would simply create a more elegant, efficient version. His Herenkyaku became a true, instantaneous flicker, with none of the faint reishi trail that even the most advanced Quincy left behind. His blood vene was not just a hardening of his blood vessels. He could actively weave the reishi in his blood to redirect and nullify the force of an impact, catching one of Bambietta's practice bombs on his forearm with only a faint ripple of light to show for it. For Bambietta, it was a daily exercise in exquisite torture. Every lesson was a new demonstration of his superiority. He wasn't arrogant about it. He wasn't mocking her. He was just better. And his quiet, analytical approach forced her to re-examine the very foundations of her own power. One afternoon, she was demonstrating the explode ability, creating small, controlled detonations to show him how she infused her spiritual signature into a cluster of reishi. The key is instability, she explained, gritting her teeth as she forced herself to teach the boy who had humiliated her with this very power. You overload the reishi particles with your will until they can't maintain their structure. Then you release the pressure. That's the trigger. Naruto watched, his head tilted. He could see the threads of her will, a furious, chaotic scribble, forcing themselves into the reishi. It was a violent, brutal process. He could also see the toll it took on her. A faint network of hairline cracks, like fissures in glass, would appear on the threads of her own spiritual body every time she created a powerful bomb. It was a self-destructive power. She was literally tearing herself apart on a spiritual level to fuel her explosions. You're hurting yourself, he stated, his voice devoid of judgment. Bambietta flinched, her concentration wavering. The bomb she was forming fizzled out. What are you talking about? I'm fine. No, you're not, he insisted, taking a step closer. Every time you use your power, you're flaying pieces of your own soul to make it work. It's crude. It's inefficient. You're trying to scream the reishi into submission. It's my power. It's how it works, she retorted, a note of desperation in her voice. The fact that he could see something she could only feel as a constant underlying exhaustion was deeply unsettling. It doesn't have to be, he said. He held out his hand. Give me your hand. Why? She asked, suspicious. Just do it. Hesitantly, she reached out and placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was surprisingly gentle. He closed his eyes, and she felt a strange, calming energy flow from him into her. It wasn't a jutsu, not a healing technique. It was a connection. Now, he said softly. Try again. But this time, don't scream at the reishi. Don't force it. Just ask it. Show it what you want it to do. See your will not as a hammer, but as a seed. Plant it in the reishi and let it grow. She scoffed, but something in his calm certainty made her try. She focused on the reishi in the air before them, but instead of forcing her will upon it, she tried to follow his bizarre instructions. She pictured the explosion, not as a command, but as a potential, an inevitability locked within the particles. She let her will gently infuse them, guiding them towards that potential. The result was astonishing. A sphere of light formed, larger and more stable than any she had ever created with so little effort. It pulsed with a deep, resonant power. A contained inferno rather than a chaotic burst. And more importantly, she didn't feel that familiar, tearing sensation in her soul. She felt invigorated, connected. How? She whispered, staring at the orb. It felt more a part of her than any explosion she had ever made. Your power isn't just the explode, Naruto said, his eyes still closed. It's the catalyst. You don't have to be the explosion. You just have to start the reaction. He released her hand. The orb remained stable and potent. Bambietta looked from the orb to him, her mind reeling. In 5 minutes, he had understood her power on a level she hadn't reached in a lifetime of using it. He hadn't just made her stronger, he had made her better. The humiliation she felt was still there, but it was now mixed with a confusing, frustrating, and undeniable spark of respect. Their strange dynamic began to shift. The lessons became less about a resentful teacher and a silent student, and more like a collaborative exploration. Her cynical pragmatism and deep knowledge of Quincy lore would clash with his intuitive, philosophical approach to power. Their verbal sparring became a constant, sharp-edged flirtation that neither of them would ever admit to. You think about everything too much, she'd say after he spent 10 minutes silently deconstructing the theory behind a simple Ginto technique. Just point and shoot. It's easier. Quote, easier isn't always better, he'd reply without looking up from the shimmering threads only he could see. If you understand how the lock works, you don't need to blow the door off its hinges. Blowing the door off its hinges is more fun, she'd shoot back with a smirk. His presence was also causing ripples throughout the Wandenreich. The other Sternrit watched him with a mixture of suspicion and grudging awe. The story of his duel with Bambietta had spread, embellished with every telling. Some, like Candace, saw him as a rival to be surpassed. Others, like the perpetually bored Liltato, found him endlessly amusing. But not everyone was amused. One day, as Naruto was walking back to his quarters from the training grounds, Bambietta trailing a few feet behind him. A silent and now customary guard, a figure blocked their path. He was tall and lean, with spiky, crimson hair and a fierce, predatory grin. His uniform was sleeveless, showing off toned, muscular arms. And he carried himself with the swagger of a man who had never lost a fight he cared about. His spiritual pressure was a raging inferno, hot and aggressive. Well, the man drawled, his voice a low growl. If it isn't Bambi's new pet. The little freak who can do party tricks. Bambietta stiffened. Baz B. Get out of our way. Baz B. Sternritter, the heat, ignored her completely. His fiery eyes were locked on Naruto. I heard you took down this hothead with some fancy light show and a few quiet words. I'm not impressed. She's all flash and no substance. All bark and no bite. Hey, Bambietta snarled, stepping forward, but Baz B shot her a look so full of condescending fire that she actually faltered. This is between me and him, princess, he said, before turning his attention back to Naruto. See, I've been watching you. You walk around like you own the place. You don't bow to the king. You think you're better than us. Some of these idiots be fooled by your little, unweving, trick, but I'm not. All I see is an upstart who needs to be put in his place. Naruto met his gaze, his expression unreadable. I'm not looking for a fight. Too bad. You've got one, Baz B grinned, cracking his knuckles. I'm formally challenging you. A duel, here and now, unless you're a coward as well as a freak. The challenge was public, loud, and aggressive. To refuse would be to lose face in front of the dozens of soldat and other Quincy who had stopped to watch. In the Wandenreich's brutal hierarchy, it was social suicide. Naruto glanced at Bambietta. He saw the flicker of worry in her eyes, quickly masked by her usual scowl. Baz B was one of the original Sternritter, one of Yuacha's most powerful and loyal hounds. His power, the heat, was pure, overwhelming offensive force. Naruto turned back to Baz B. Fine, he said, his voice calm. I accept. A grin split Baz B's face. That's what I like to hear. They moved to the center of the training arena. The crowd of spectators forming a wide circle. Baz B took his stance, fire already beginning to lick at his fingertips. Let's set some ground rules, Baz B said, his grin widening. No running, no hiding, and no cheap tricks. Just power against power. Let's see if your silent hocus pocus can stand up to my fire. He was trying to negate Naruto's primary advantages, his Super-IO. Harenkyaku and his ability to deconstruct attacks. He wanted a brawl, a straightforward contest of raw power. Naruto simply nodded. All right. Baz-B didn't wait for a signal. He thrust 2 fingers forward. Burner Finger 1. A thin, concentrated beam of pure heat, like a laser, shot from his fingertips, aimed directly at Naruto's heart. It was incredibly fast and lethally precise. Naruto didn't move. He raised his hand, and just as he had with Bambietta's bombs, he perceived the threads of the attack. It was a simple, direct line of focused thermal energy. He didn't try to unravel it. Instead, he wove a small, intricate lens of reishi in the air directly in front of him. The beam of heat struck the invisible lens and was refracted, bent at a sharp 90-degree angle. It shot harmlessly, past Naruto and slammed into the far wall, melting a perfect, molten hole in the stone. Baz-B's eyes widened. What the? You said no cheap tricks, Naruto said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. Refraction is physics. It's elegant. Baz-B's shock turned to rage. You little smart ass. He held up his hand, all 5 fingers outstretched. Then try this. Burner Finger 5. A massive, wide-area blast of fire, like a tidal wave of pure heat, erupted from his hand, washing across the arena. It was too wide to dodge, too powerful to block. But Naruto wasn't planning on blocking it. He held both hands out, and his perception of the threads expanded. He wasn't just seeing Baz-B's attack. He was seeing the entire battlefield. He saw the flow of reishi, the currents of air, the very thermodynamics of the space between them. He didn't erect a shield. He became a conductor. As the wall of fire was about to hit him, he wove a complex channel of reishi around himself, a swirling vortex. The fire struck the vortex and was not stopped, but redirected. It flowed around him, splitting into 2 streams that followed the path he had woven for them. The torrent of flames curved through the air, completely bypassing him. Then converged again behind him, slamming into each other with a deafening roar. Naruto stood untouched in the eye of the fiery hurricane, the heat washing past him on all sides. His clothes barely fluttering. The crowd gasped. Bambietta watched, her heart pounding. She had never seen anyone treat Baz-B's flames with such casual, contemptuous ease. Baz-B was apoplectic. This was his ultimate power. His pride. And this boy was playing with it like it was a water hose. I'll burn you to ashes. He roared, unleashing his full power. His entire body became wreathed in flames, and the temperature in the arena skyrocketed. Burning full body, he charged, a living meteor of rage and fire. Naruto stood his ground. He could feel the overwhelming heat, could say, the threads of Baz-B's very being alight with his power. He couldn't just redirect this. This was a direct, physical assault. So he met it directly. He gathered reishi, not into a blade or an arrow, but into his own body. He reinforced his own spiritual threads, weaving them tighter, stronger. He activated blood vene, but it was a version no one had ever seen before. He wove the reishi in his blood into a closed, looping system. A perfect cooling circuit. Baz-B's fist, wreathed in flames that could melt steel, slammed into Naruto's outstretched palm. There was no explosion, no shockwave, just the sound of sizzling meat. But it wasn't Naruto's. The flames that surrounded Baz-B's fist were sucked into Naruto's palm, drawn in by the powerful thermal differential he had created. Baz-B fell. The heat being drained from his body at an alarming rate, a sensation so alien and horrifying it made him freeze. My power is the heat, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet as he held the fist of the burning man in his bare hand. It is the transfer of thermal energy from a hotter system to a colder one. All I had to do was become colder. With a sudden twist, he dislocated Baz-B's wrist and shoved him back. Baz-B stumbled away, clutching his arm, his flames sputtering and dying. The look on his face was one of utter disbelief and dawning horror. His greatest weapon had been turned against him. His fire literally stolen from his grasp. Naruto didn't press the attack. He simply stood there, his palm slightly reddened but otherwise unharmed. The duel was over. He had won. He had aced down one of the most aggressive and powerful Sternritter and had dismantled him with intelligence, precision, and a fundamental understanding of his opponent's power. As he stood in the silent arena, The respect from the crowd was a palpable thing. But as he looked at Bastebine's defeated form, he felt a sudden, chilling premonition. A flash of insight from the threads. He saw a vision, brief and terrifying. A sky of black, not gray. Pillars of light, not of fire, descending on the Wandenreich. He saw Quincy turning on Quincy. He saw Bastebine, not as an enemy, but fighting back to back with him against a common, betraying foe. And he saw Yuacha's multi-pupiled eyes, watching it all, his expression one of cold, calculated necessity. The vision faded, leaving him with a cold knot in his stomach. This rivalry with Bastebine was not the real conflict. It was just a prelude. The true danger wasn't an external enemy. It was here, within the very walls of the Silbern. He had just earned the respect of his rivals. But in doing so, he had likely earned the undivided, and far more dangerous, attention of his king. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Broken Leaf. The victory over Bastebine Solidif. I.e.d. Naruto's status within the Wandenreich. He was no longer just Bambi's pet, or the freak. He was an undeniable power, a strategic mind whose abilities defied conventional Quincy combat doctrine. The fear and suspicion from the other Sternritter were replaced by a cautious, grudging respect. Bastebine himself, after a day of sullen silence, approached Naruto not with a challenge, but with a sharp, inquisitive demand to know how he had stolen his heat. A new, complex rivalry was born, one based on a mutual, if combative, acknowledgement of strength. The gilded cage had become more comfortable. His training sessions with Bambietta evolved into genuine collaborations. He would help her refine her catalytic control, teaching her to create complex, delayed detonation chain reactions and shaped charges of explosive force, turning her from a blunt instrument into a scalpel of destruction. In return, she drilled him relentlessly on Quincy history, lore, and the brutal politics of the Sternritter court. Her cynical insights providing a crucial map to the treacherous landscape he now inhabited. Their banter became their language. The insults were still there, but they were laced with an undercurrent of affection neither would dare to name. If you spent half as much time on your footwork as you do staring at things only you can see, you might actually look like a fighter, she'd scoff. Watching him stand perfectly still in the training yard, his eyes distant as he traced the flow of reishi through the city. And if you spent half as much time thinking before you explode things, you might not have to explode them in the first place, he'd shoot back without turning. But I guess that's too much to ask. A faint smile would touch her lips before she'd mask it with a scowl. Shut up. I like exploding things. It was during one of these quiet moments, standing on the balcony of his opulent suite and looking out over the silent, white city, that his old world came crashing back in. He felt it first. A distortion. A flicker in the otherwise smooth, controlled tapestry of the Silbern's spiritual pressure. It was small, stealthy, and utterly alien. It was chakra. He straightened, his senses instantly on high alert. Bambietta, who was lounging on a sofa inside, noticed his sudden tension. What is it? Did you see another shiny thread to distract you? Shinobi, he said, his voice low and hard. They're here. Bambietta shot to her feet, her playful demeanor vanishing, replaced by the sharp focus of a predator. Here, in the Silbern. That's impossible. No one can get in here. They're here, he repeated, his weaver sense pinpointing the intruders. There were 5 of them, moving with incredible stealth through the lower service corridors of a nearby spire. They were masked in some kind of chakra-suppressing cloak, but to his perception, which saw the spiritual essence of things, they might as well have been wearing neon signs. Their threads were tight, disciplined, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were not normal shinobi. They were puppets. Root, a cold part of his mind supplied. Danzo's personal army of assassins. Who? Bambietta demanded, coming to stand beside him at the railing. An old problem, Naruto said grimly. From my village. Before he could decide on a course of action, an alarm began to blare throughout the Silbern. Not the loud, panicked klaxon of a frontal assault, but a series of sharp, coded chimes that signaled an internal security breach. The city, which was always alert, snapped to a state of total war in an instant. Squads of soldat began to move with silent, deadly efficiency, their movements perfectly coordinated as they began to lock down the city sector by sector. They've been detected, Bambietta said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. Stupid mud people. They have no idea what they just walked into. But Naruto felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was too easy. Too sloppy for Root. Danzo was a master of manipulation, of plots within plots. An open infiltration like this, it wasn't a plan. It was a diversion. As the soldat closed in on the intruder's position, the 5 Root members acted. They didn't try to fight or flee. They simultaneously detonated themselves, not with paper bombs, but with a forbidden sealing jutsu that turned their own bodies into massive, violent vortexes of raw, unstable chakra. The explosions ripped through the lower levels of the spire, the chaotic, messy energy of the chakra blasts a violent sacrilege in the pristine reishi environment of the Wandenreich. The Blah STS were powerful enough to destabilize the tower's foundations, causing it to groan and list precariously. It was an act of pure, suicidal terrorism. But Naruto knew, with a sinking certainty, that this still wasn't the main goal. This was a diversion for a diversion. While the entire city's attention was focused on the explosions and the subsequent containment efforts, he felt a sixth presence. One that had used the chaos of the 5 chakra bombs to mask its approach. This one was different. It moved with a speed that rivaled Herenkyaku, its presence a fleeting whisper. It was heading directly for them. Get ready, Naruto said, pushing Bambietta behind him. The glass of the balcony window shattered inwards as a figure crashed through. It was a Root operative, clad in the same blank porcelain mask and black uniform. But this one moved with a chilling, inhuman grace. It held a short, black tanto blade that radiated a malevolent, chakra-devouring aura. The operative didn't attack. It landed in a crouch, then tossed a small, sealed scroll at Naruto's feet. A message for the traitor, the operative said, its voice a digitally distorted monotone. Then, with a burst of speed, it turned and leapt from the balcony, vanishing into the chasms between the city's spires before any of the soldat could even react. Naruto stared at the scroll, his heart turning to ice. He knew what this was. The final move in Danzo's game. Bambietta stepped forward, her hand already glowing with explosive energy. What the hell was that? A messenger boy. I should have blasted him. No, Naruto said, kneeling down to look at the scroll. That's exactly what he wanted. He wanted to deliver this. He could see the threads of the scroll. It was sealed with a complex lock, but there was a more insidious layer to it. It was drenched in a specific chakra signature, one he knew as well as his own. A marker, a tracking beacon. By delivering this scroll, the operative had just painted a giant, unmissable target on his location for anyone in their home dimension. He picked it up. He didn't need to open it to know the lie it contained. But he did anyway. He channeled a tiny amount of reishi into the seal, unraveling it. The scroll opened with a soft hiss. The message was short, written in crisp, official script. To the Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki. Your desertion has been noted. As you have abandoned your village has abandoned its protection of those you hold dear. The academy instructor, Iruka Yumino, has been taken into custody under the traitor's kin clause. His life is forfeit for your crimes. If you wish to petition for his clemency, you will present yourself at the Konoha gates within 48 hours. Alone. By order of the acting council head, Danzo Shimura. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. His weaver sense could feel the subtle threads of deception woven into the very ink of the message. Danzo wouldn't risk the political fallout of arresting a beloved academy teacher. It was a bluff, a perfectly crafted piece of emotional blackmail designed to exploit the one weakness Danzo believed Naruto still had, his attachments. Bambietta read the message over his shoulder. Iruka Yumino. Who's that? The first person who ever acknowledged me, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. He crushed the scroll in his fist, the paper turning to dust. The lie didn't matter. The intent behind it did. Danzo had weaponized his past, used the memory of the one person who had shown him kindness as a baited hook. And it was working. Logically, he knew it was a trap. Danzo had an army of Root ninja and a village full of seals waiting for him. He knew walking back into Konoha was suicide. But the image of Iruka, his warm smile, the memory of the ramen they'd shared. The pride in his eyes when Naruto had finally graduated, it was a hook in his heart that Danzo was expertly twisting. Even if it was a 1 in a million chance that Danzo was telling the truth, could he risk it? Could he live with himself if he did nothing, and Iruka paid the price? No, he couldn't. It's a trap, Bambietta said, her voice sharp and serious. She had seen the look on his face. You know it's a trap. They're trying to lure you back. They'll kill you. I know, he said, his gaze distant. So you're not going to be an idiot and go, right? She asked, a note of genuine concern in her voice. He turned and met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw a resolve as hard and unyielding as diamond. He thinks he can use my connections against me. He thinks my loyalty to my friends is a weakness he can exploit. He clenched his fist. I'm going to show him it's my greatest strength. Bambietta stared at him, her mind racing. This was insane. He was walking into the lion's den. He would die. And her orders, from Yuwatch himself, were to ensure his continued presence in the Silburn. Letting him go was a direct violation of the king's command. She would be punished, executed, probably, but as she looked at the quiet, unshakable determination on his face, she saw the same boy who had faced down her explosions without flinching, the same man who had dismantled Basby's fire with cold logic. He was not asking for her permission. He was informing her of his decision. And in that moment, she realized something. She didn't care about the king's orders. She didn't care about the punishment. The thought of him going alone, of him walking into that trap and dying, it was unacceptable. A slow, wicked smile spread across her face, the same one she wore before a truly satisfying battle. They want a monster, she said, cracking her knuckles, a familiar, exciting glow beginning to form around her hands. Let's give them one. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise. Bambi, you don't have to do this. This isn't your fight. Yuwatch will. Shut up. She cut him off. You think I'm going to let you go have all the fun by yourself? Besides, she added, her grin turning predatory, they never blown up a shinobi village before. It sounds therapeutic. Before Naruto could argue further, the door to his suite burst open. It was Candace, Liltato, Meninas, and Giselle. They had heard the commotion, seen the message. Are you two completely insane? Candace demanded, her lightning bolt pupils wide with disbelief. You're going to defy the king and go on a suicide mission for some mud person teacher. Sounds like a party, Giselle cooed, clapping her hands. Can I come? I love suicide missions. And I bet those shinobi have lots of yummy blood. Liltato, ever the pragmatist, leaned against the doorframe, chewing on a piece of stolen food from Naruto's pantry. His Majesty's orders were to ensure his continued presence. Technically, if we all go with him, and then bring him back, we're following orders. She gave a lazy shrug. And I'm bored. A field trip could be nice. Meninas, the quiet one, simply looked at Bambietta, then at Naruto, and gave a small, firm nod. Where Bambietta went, she followed. Their bond was unspoken but absolute. Naruto looked at the four girls, the volatile, explosive queen who was ready to defy her god king for him, the cynical glutton looking for entertainment, the psychotic zombie eager for bloodshed, the thuggish thunder user spoiling for a fight, and the quiet powerhouse whose loyalty was a silent shield. This was his escort, his backup, a small, dysfunctional, and terrifyingly powerful army of renegade Valkyries. He had come to this world alone. But he wasn't alone anymore. A genuine smile, the first one he'd shown in days, touched his lips. Danzo had tried to use his oldest bond to trap him. But in doing so, he had galvanized the new, strange, and powerful bonds Naruto had forged in this alien world. All right, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a newfound confidence. He looked at the chaotic group before him, his team. Let's go remind my old village about the dangers of kicking a hornet's nest. Bambietta's grin widened. She held out a hand. And Reishi gathered, not into a bomb, but into a shimmering, unstable vortex. A garganta, a tear in reality that connected the dimensions. It was a crude, brutish method of travel compared to Hashwalth's silent transitions, but it was fast, and it was loud. It was a fitting way for them to make their entrance. Ladies, Bambietta said, her voice dripping with Malicio's glee as she gestured towards the swirling portal of darkness. Let's go break some things. They stepped through the portal, one after another, a small band of demigods on their way to answer a summons, not as prisoners, but as a conquering storm. They were going to walk into a trap, but it was no longer clear who was the hunter, and who was the prey. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Serpent and the Eagle. The air that hit them on the other side of the Garganta was a physical assault. It was thick, humid, and alive with the smells of damp earth, pollen, and the distant, familiar scent of wood smoke and cooking fires. To Naruto, it was the smell of home, a scent he hadn't realized he'd missed. To the Sternritter, it was a foul, organic stench, a stark contrast to the sterile, pure reishi atmosphere of the Silburn. "Ugh, it stinks," Candace complained, wrinkling her nose. "It smells alive, gross." "I kinda like it," Giselle chirped, taking a deep, exaggerated breath. "It smells like blood and dirt and things that rot." Cozy. They stood in a familiar clearing just outside the main gates of Konohagakure, the swirling black Garganta closing behind them with a sound like tearing fabric. The midday sun, a real and singular sun, beat down from a brilliant blue sky, a sight so alien to the Quincy girls that they all squinted, momentarily disoriented. Naruto took a moment to center himself. The spiritual energy here was thin. A pale, watery soup compared to the rich feast of the Wandenreich. He could feel the drain already, the effort it took to maintain his enhanced perception and the reishi-based uniform he wore. For the others, the effect was even more pronounced. They were like deep-sea creatures brought to the surface, their immense power needing more fuel than this world could easily provide. They would be at a disadvantage in a prolonged war of attrition. This had to be fast. He looked at the towering wooden gates of his former home, the two massive doors bearing the leaf symbol. He could feel the chakra signatures within. The lazy, bored energy of the gate guards, the bustling civilian life further in, the sharp, disciplined spikes of shinobi on patrol. And beneath it all, a cold, coiled knot of hidden power. Danzo's trap, an entire network of root Anbu, hidden in the shadows, their chakra suppressed, waiting. "So, what's the plan, boss?" Liltato asked, leaning G against a tree and pulling out a ration bar from one of her many pockets. "Do we knock, or do we just start blowing holes in the wall?" "We knock," Naruto said, his voice calm and steady. "They want me to come alone. They're expecting a desperate boy, begging for his friend's life. They're not expecting a diplomatic envoy." He started walking towards the gate, his posture erect, his stride confident. He was no longer the outcast child scurrying through the alleys. He was a foreign power, and he would act like it. The five Sternritter fell into step behind him, a formidable and utterly alien honor guard. Bambietta was at his right, her expression a mask of bored arrogance, her hand resting casually on her hip. Candace and Menina's flanked them, radiating intimidating power. Liltato and Giselle brought up the rear, looking for all the world like a pair of bored, psychotic tourists. The two Chunin guards at the gate, Katetsu and Izumo, were half asleep in their booth, playing a game of shogi. They didn't even look up until Naruto and his entourage were 20 feet away. Izumo blinked, his eyes widening as he took in the bizarre sight. Katetsu." Katetsu looked up, his jaw dropping. He saw the boy, Naruto Uzumaki, the village's pariah and Jinchuriki, who was supposed to be on a long-term training mission. But he was dressed in strange, pristine white and black clothes, and he carried himself with an unnerving, regal calm. And behind him were five of the most terrifyingly beautiful and dangerous-looking women he had ever seen, all dressed in equally bizarre, militaristic uniforms. "Naruto," Katetsu stammered, scrambling out of the booth. "What are you? Who are these people?" "I'm here to see the Hokage Council," Naruto said, his voice polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. "My associates and I have traveled a great distance. We will not be kept waiting." The sheer, unshakable authority in his tone was so contrary to the loud-mouthed brat they knew that it left them speechless. Before they could formulate a response, a new figure appeared in a swirl of leaves. It was a Jonin, his face grim, his posture tense. Shikaku Nara, the head of the Ra clan and the village's chief strategist. He had clearly been sent to intercept them. Shikaku's tired eyes took in the scene with a single, sweeping glance. He saw Naruto, the change in him, the quiet power he now radiated. Then he saw the five women behind him, and his strategic mind went into overdrive. He could feel the immense, suffocating pressure they exuded. It wasn't chakra. It was something else, something terrifyingly potent. This wasn't a runaway kid returning home. This was a potential international incident. Naruto, Shikaku said, his voice carefully neutral. There have been reports of your desertion. I didn't desert, Naruto replied calmly. I was recruited, and now I'm here for a discussion regarding Konoha's recent foreign policy decisions. Specifically, the abduction of its citizens. Shikaku's eyes narrowed. The bluff, Danzo's move. He had argued against it in the council meeting, calling it reckless and inflammatory. It seemed he had been right. This is a delicate situation, Shikaku said, his mind racing through potential outcomes, most of them ending in explosions and rubble. Perhaps your associates could wait here while we talk. No, Bambietta said, stepping forward. Her voice was sharp, imperious. We go where he goes. That's the deal, unless you want to try and stop us. She gave him a sweet, venomous smile, and the reishi around her hand began to hum audibly. Shikaku felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead. The sheer density of the energy coming from her was staggering. A fight here, at the main gate, would be a catastrophe. What a drag, he muttered under his breath. He made a decision. Fine, follow me, but I'm warning you, the village is on high alert. Any hostile moves will be met with overwhelming force. Don't worry, Lil Tato drawled from the back. We're only hostile when we're bored. And right now, this is very entertaining. Shikaku led them through the village. The effect was instantaneous. The bustling streets went silent. Conversations died. People stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and fear. They saw Naruto, the demon brat, walking through their streets not as an outcast, but as a leader. Flanked by a retinue of otherworldly power. The silent ostracism he had always faced was replaced by a new, more potent silence, the silence of awe and terror. They were led not to the Hokage's office, but to the main council chamber, a large, amphitheater-like room where the heads of the great clans and the village elders convened. The room was already full. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat in the central chair. Looking ancient and weary, beside him were his old teammates, Homura and Kaharu, their faces grim masks of disapproval. And sitting among them, his bandaged eye and the exposed half of his face a chilling sight, was Danzo Shimura. He watched Naruto enter with an expression of cold, reptilian satisfaction. The trap had been sprung. The piece was back on the board. Heads of the major clans were all present. Shikaku's father, Inoichi Yamanaka, Choza Akamichi, Hiyashi Hyuga, Su Minazuka, Shibi Aburame. They all watched Naruto's entrance with stony, calculating expressions. Naruto walked to the center of the chamber floor, his five-stern ritter forming a loose, intimidating semicircle behind him. He was supposed to be the accused, the traitor brought to judgment. Instead, he looked like a king holding court. Naruto Uzumaki, Kaharu began, her voice shrill and accusatory. You stand accused of deserting your village and consorting with unknown, hostile powers. How do you plead? Naruto didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Danzo. I am not here to plead, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. I am here as a representative of a sovereign power, the Wandenreich. To lodge a formal complaint. One of your elders has seen fit to engage in an act of terrorism against my people and has taken a citizen of Konoha hostage to use as leverage. This is an act of war. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Hiyashi Hyuga's brow furrowed. What is the meaning of this? Hostage. Act of war. He's lying. Homura snapped. He is a traitor trying to deflect from his own crimes. Danzo remained silent, a small, knowing smirk playing on his lips. He watched Naruto, waiting for the boy to break, to demand Iruka's release, to show the emotional weakness he was counting on. But Naruto didn't. He turned his attention to Hiruzen. Lord Third, for years, you told me to have faith in the village, to believe in the will of fire. I did, and in return, I was hunted in your forests by this man's private assassins and threatened with having my soul ripped from my body for an experiment. Hiruzen flinched, the words hitting him like a physical blow. Ibiki's report had been heavily redacted and classified by Danzo, but the old Hokage had suspected the truth. To hear it laid bare in the middle of his council was a deep shame. And now, Naruto continued. His voice rising with cold, controlled anger. He uses the name of a good man, Iruka-sensei, to try and manipulate me. A man whose only crime was showing kindness to a lonely child. He uses the bonds you taught me to cherish as weapons against me. Is this the will of fire, Lord Third? Or is it just the will of the parasite hiding in your shadow? He pointed a finger directly at Danzo. I am here to demand justice. Not just for me, but for Konoha. I demand that Danzo Shimura be stripped of his authority and brought to answer for his crimes, for the unsanctioned operation against a Konoha shinobi. For the founding and operation of an illegal black ops unit outside the Hokage's chain of command, and for attempting to incite a war through unsanctioned diplomatic channels. Danzo finally spoke, his voice a dry rasp. Bold words from a traitor and a monster. You have no proof, only the wild accusations of a child who has turned his back on his home. Oh, I think we have proof, Naruto said calmly. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, intricately woven ball of silver threads. It was a recording device, a Quincy technique he had reverse engineered. He tossed it onto the floor. This is a complete, unedited recording of my specialized training in the Forest of Death, including the direct confessions of your root operatives that they were acting on your orders. It also includes their attempt to use a forbidden soul-rending jutsu on me. I'm sure the Yamanaka clan's mind walkers would be happy to verify its authenticity. Inoichi Yamanaka's eyes widened. Hikaku's father looked from the device to Danzo, his expression hardening. Danzo's smirk faltered for the first time. He had not anticipated this. The boy was supposed to be emotional, predictable, not a cold, calculating political operator. This changes nothing, Danzo snarled, rising to his feet. He is a threat. His new power is a danger to Konoha. It must be controlled. He is the Jinchuriki. His loyalty is to this village. And this village alone. He made a subtle, almost invisible movement with his bandaged hand. Naruto felt it instantly. A single, razor-thin thread of chakra, almost imperceptible, snaking towards him. It was a thread of pure command, the legendary Koto Amatsukami. A genjutsu so powerful it could rewrite a person's mind without them ever knowing. It was Danzo's ultimate trump card. But to the Weaver, it was just another thread. Before the jutsu could even reach him, Naruto lifted a hand and made a sharp, cutting gesture in the air. The thread of Koto Amatsukami, invisible to everyone else in the room, was severed. It dissolved into nothing. Danzo gasped, stumbling back a step. He felt the connection break, his most powerful weapon rendered inert before it had even been fired. He stared at Naruto, his single visible eye wide with disbelief and, for the first time, genuine fear. The boy hadn't just resisted the jutsu. He had perceived it and destroyed it. Your tricks won't work on me anymore, Danzo, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I see the strings you pull. All of them. That was the breaking point. The public humiliation, the exposure of his plots, the failure of his ultimate weapon. It was too much. Danzo's cold, political mask shattered, revealing the rabid dog beneath. Then you will die, he shrieked, and made a series of hand signs. Anbu, eliminate the traitors. From the shadows of the council chamber's ceiling, 24 root operatives dropped down, surrounding Naruto and the Sternritter. They moved with silent, inhuman precision, their blades drawn. Their killing intent a palpable wave. The clan heads scrambled back, drawing their own weapons. Hiruzen slammed his hand on the table. Danzo, stop this. This is a council chamber, not a killing floor. Quote, but Danzo was beyond reason. They are a threat. I will eliminate them. Bambietta's predatory grin returned, wider and more manic than ever. Finally, she squealed with delight. I was getting so bored of all this talking. She didn't even wait for Naruto's command. She raised her hand, and a dozen spheres of destructive light appeared, hovering around her like angry hornets. Now, which one of you puppets wants to dance? Candace cackled, lightning arcing between her fingertips. It's about time we showed these mud people what real power looks like. Get ready for a thunderstorm. The root operatives, conditioned to be fearless, charged. The result was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Bambietta's bombs detonated in a series of precise, devastating explosions, each one completely atomizing a root member without so much as scratching the chamber's walls. She was a whirlwind of controlled destruction, laughing with manic joy as she turned Danzo's elite assassins into dust. Candace was a bolt of living lightning, moving too fast for the eye to follow, leaving trails of ozone and the smell of burnt flesh in her wake. Her Galvano blast turned one operative into a smoking statue of carbon. Liltato's mouth opened to an impossible, cartoonish width as she simply bit a charging shinobi in half, swallowing him whole before looking around for her next meal. Menina's, with a single, contemptuous punch, sent an operative flying through the stone wall of the chamber, leaving a perfect, body-shaped hole. Giselle danced through the chaos, her creepy smile never leaving her face. A root ninja managed to slash her arm with his tanto. Owie! She cooed, looking at the wound. Then, as the ninja recoiled, a spray of her blood landed on his mask. He froze instantly, his eyes glazing over. "Now you're my puppet," Giselle sang, and the root operative turned and began attacking his own comrades with mindless ferocity. The clan heads and the Hokage could only watch in stunned horror. These weren't just powerful individuals. They were forces of nature, each with an ability that warped the rules of combat. Danzo's elite, emotionless assassins, the pride of his secret army, were being dismantled, consumed, and turned against each other with contemptuous ease. Naruto himself did not move from the center of the room. He simply watched Danzo, the old war hawk, seeing his entire force annihilated in under a minute, finally panicked. He ripped the bandages from his arm, revealing a grotesque sight: a dozen Sharingan eyes, stolen from dead Uchiha, embedded in his flesh. All of them staring blankly. He was preparing to use the forbidden jutsu, Izanagi. But Naruto wouldn't let him. He flickered, a single, perfect use of Harenkyaku, and appeared directly in front of Danzo. The old man gasped, trying to bring his arm up, but Naruto was faster. Naruto didn't strike him with a blade. He didn't hit him with a jutsu. He placed his open palm on Danzo's chest. "I see all the threads. Old man," Naruto whispered. "The ones that connect you to these stolen eyes. The ones that connect you to the first Hokage's cells you implanted in your body. The power you stole to make yourself strong." He closed his eyes, and a soft, silver light emanated from his palm. "And what can be woven," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet, terrifying power, "can be unwoven." Danzo screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It was not a physical pain. He felt his power, his very connection to the enhancements that defined him, being severed. The chakra from the Sharingan eyes on his arm sputtered and died. The vitality from the Hashirama cells within him withered, leaving him feeling ancient and frail. The threads of stolen power were being systematically, irrevocably unraveled from his soul. When Naruto removed his hand, Danzo collapsed to the floor, gasping. He was not dead. He was not even physically wounded. But he was broken. He was just an old, frail man. His stolen godhood stripped away, leaving him pathetic and powerless. The Sharingan on his arm closed forever, becoming nothing more than grotesque, glassy trophies. Ents fell over the ruined council chamber. The few remaining root operatives lay dead or incapacitated. The Sternritter stood amidst the carnage, looking bored. Naruto stood over the whimpering form of the most feared man in Konoha. He had not killed him. He had done something far worse. He had taken everything from him, leaving him alive to face the consequences of his actions, a living monument to his own failure. Naruto turned to face the stunned Hokage and the clan heads. "My friend," Naruto said, his voice cold and clear. "Iruka Yumino. Where is he?" Hiruzen, looking older than ever, finally found his voice. "He is safe, Naruto. He is at his apartment. He was never in any danger. I swear it on my name as Hokage." Naruto nodded once, the tension leaving his shoulders. He had known it was a lie. But the confirmation was a relief he hadn't realized he needed. He looked at the wreckage of the room, at the horrified faces of his village's leaders, at the broken man on the floor. He had come back to answer a threat, and had instead shattered the political landscape of his home. "This village has a sickness," Naruto said, his voice filled with a profound sadness. "And I don't think I can be the cure anymore." He turned his back on them all and walked towards the hole Meninas had made in the wall. "Bambi," he called out. "Let's go home." Bambietta, still buzzing from the short, exhilarating fight, grinned and tore open another Garganta, a swirling vortex of darkness that led back to the cold, white world of the Wandenreich. They stepped through, leaving behind a silent council chamber, a broken serpent, and a village that would never look at its Jinchuriki the same way again. They had faced the monster in the leaf's shadow, and they had left it toothless and declawed. Chapter 6 End.